The ancient pickup truck groaned as Ethan Cole guided it along the winding road that led to Willowbrook. Golden wheat fields stretched endlessly on either side, occasionally broken by clusters of weathered barns and silos. As he crested a hill, the village came into view, a picturesque collection of red brick buildings and white painted houses nestled in a valley, as if time had forgotten to touch this corner of Pennsylvania. Ethan's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. For the 100th time, he ran through the details of his carefully crafted persona. Daniel Foster, he muttered under his breath. Born here in 1989, left for Philadelphia in 2004. Parents deceased, no siblings. The life he had invented was far removed from his own troubled past in Chicago's South Side. As he approached the Welcome to Willowbrook sign, its faded paint barely legible, Ethan took a deep breath and let it out slowly. He'd done this before, assumed new identities, infiltrated communities, but never for a score this big. The promise of millions in historical artifacts hidden somewhere in this sleepy village made his pulse quicken. The truck rattled over a small bridge spanning a creek that cut through the heart of Willowbrook. Ethan's keen eyes took in every detail: the general store with its sun-bleached awning, the tiny post office, and the white steeple of a church peeking above the treetops. A few locals paused their activities to watch the unfamiliar vehicle pass by, their curious gazes following him. He pulled up in front of the Willowbrook Inn, a 3-story Victorian house that had seen better days. Paint peeled from its gingerbread trim, and one of the shutters hung askew. Ethan climbed out of the truck, stretching his lean frame after the long drive. He'd chosen his wardrobe carefully: khakis and a blue button-down shirt, smart but not flashy. The kind of outfit a successful businessman might wear when returning to his humble roots. "Well, I'll be," a voice called out, "if it isn't little Danny Foster." Ethan turned to see an older man approaching, his weathered face split by a wide grin. This was the moment of truth, the first test of his cover story. Plastering on his most disarming smile, Ethan extended his hand. "Mr. Wilson, right? It's been a long time." The old man pumped his hand enthusiastically. 20 years if it's a day. Look at you, all grown up. Your folks would be proud, God rest their souls." Ethan allowed a hint of sadness to cross his features. "I wish they could have seen me come home. How have you been, Mr. Wilson? The place hasn't changed much." "Oh, can't complain. Though times have been tough lately. But never mind that. What brings you back to Willowbrook after all this time?" This was the opening Ethan had been waiting for. He leaned in conspiratorially. "Well, I've had some success in business, and I've been thinking it might be time to give back to the community that raised me. Maybe see if there are some investment opportunities here." Mr. Wilson's eyes lit up. "Is that so? Well, you'll want to talk to Mayor Carlson about that. He's always looking for ways to breathe some life back into Willowbrook." "I'll do that," Ethan nodded. "But first, I think I need to get settled in." "Is old Mrs. Thornton still running the inn?" "Oh no, she passed on 5 years back. Her niece Olivia runs it now. Lovely girl, about your age, I'd say." Mr. Wilson winked, and Ethan forced a chuckle. "Well, I'd better get checked in. It was great seeing you, Mr. Wilson. I'm sure we'll talk again soon." As the old man ambled away, Ethan allowed himself a small sigh of relief. First hurdle cleared. He grabbed his duffel bag from the truck and headed for the inn's entrance, already planning his next moves. The door creaked as he pushed it open, and a small bell tinkled overhead. The lobby was cozy, if a bit worn, with floral wallpaper and antique furniture that had seen decades of use. "Hello?" Ethan called out. "Anyone here?" A young woman emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a messy bun, and freckles dusted her nose. "Hi there. Welcome to the Willowbrook Inn. I'm Olivia. How can I help you?" Ethan stepped forward, turning on the charm. "Hi, Olivia. I'm Daniel Foster. I grew up here in Willowbrook, and I'm back for a visit. I was hoping to get a room for a few weeks." Olivia's green eyes widened in recognition. "Daniel Foster? I've heard about you. Your parents were friends with my aunt. It's so nice to finally meet you." As they chatted and went through the check-in process, Ethan's mind was already racing ahead. Olivia could be a valuable source of information about the town's history and its residents. He'd have to cultivate this relationship carefully. Later, as Ethan unpacked in his room, he stood by the window looking out over the main street of Willowbrook. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. For a moment he felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, a sense of peace, perhaps, or belonging. He shook it off quickly. He wasn't here to admire the scenery or make friends. He had a job to do, a fortune to find, and nothing, not the quaint charm of Willowbrook, not the welcoming smiles of its residents, was going to distract him from his goal. As darkness fell over the village, Ethan Cole, alias Daniel Foster, began to plan his next move in the grand deception that was only just beginning. The next morning, Ethan rose early, his mind already racing with plans. He dressed carefully in pressed slacks and a light sweater, the picture of a successful businessman on a casual day. As he made his way down to the inn's small dining room, he reminded himself to soften his gait, to adopt the easy manner of someone returning to familiar surroundings. Olivia greeted him with a warm smile as he entered. "Good morning, Daniel. I hope you slept well. Coffee?" "That would be great, thanks," Ethan replied, returning her smile. He scanned the room, noting two elderly men hunched over a chessboard in the corner and a middle-aged woman sipping tea by the window. Perfect. An audience. As Olivia poured his coffee, Ethan spoke just loudly enough to be overheard. "You know, it's amazing how much this place brings back. I was just thinking about old Mr. Granger's history classes. Remember how he used to go on about Willowbrook's role in the Underground Railroad?" Olivia's eyes lit up. "Oh, yes. He was always so passionate about local history. Did you know his grandson Tom still lives here? He runs the local museum now." Ethan feigned surprise, though inwardly he was elated. This was exactly the kind of lead he'd been hoping for. "Really? I'll have to stop by and say hello. Maybe he can fill me in on what I've missed these past 20 years. After breakfast, Ethan set out to explore the town, carefully crafting his image with each interaction. He stopped by the general store, run by a chatty woman named Betty, who was all too happy to fill him in on 2 decades of local gossip. He made sure to drop hints about his supposed business success and his interest in investing in the community. By lunchtime, word of Daniel Foster's return had spread through Willowbrook like wildfire. As Ethan made his way to the small diner on Main Street, he could feel curious eyes following him. He reveled in the attention, knowing each glance meant his cover story was taking root. At the diner, he was barely seated before Mayor Carlson appeared, all hearty handshakes and broad smiles. "Daniel, my boy, when old Wilson told me you were back in town, I could hardly believe it. How long has it been?" Ethan stood, shaking the mayor's hand firmly. "Too long, Mr. Mayor. Almost 20 years now, but it's good to be back." They sat, and Mayor Carlson leaned in eagerly. "So, I hear you've done well for yourself out there in the big city. Any chance you might be looking to bring some of that success back home?" This was the opening Ethan had been waiting for. He affected a thoughtful expression. "Well, I've been giving it some thought. Willowbrook was good to me growing up. I'd like to return the favor if I can." The mayor's eyes gleamed. "That's wonderful news, Daniel. You know, we've been trying to drum up interest in restoring some of our historical sites. The old Mason House, for instance. It's got a fascinating history dating back to the Civil War era, but we just haven't had the funds." Ethan listened intently, filing away every detail. The Mason house could be exactly what he was looking for. "That does sound interesting," he mused. "I'd love to hear more about it. In fact, I was planning to visit the local museum this afternoon. Maybe we could continue this conversation later in the week." Mayor Carlson agreed enthusiastically, and they set a time to meet. As the mayor left, visibly buoyed by the prospect of new investment, Ethan allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. Things were falling into place perfectly. After lunch, Ethan made his way to the Willowbrook Historical Museum, a small brick building tucked between the library and the post office. A bell chimed softly as he entered, and he found himself in a room filled with glass cases, displaying artifacts and old photographs. "Can I help you?" a voice called out. A man in his early 30s emerged from a back room, pushing his glasses up his nose. Ethan stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Hi, I'm Daniel Foster. I heard you might be Tom Granger." Tom's face lit up with recognition. "Daniel Foster! I remember you from when we were kids. Grandpa used to say you were one of his best students." As they shook hands, Ethan noticed the ink stains on Tom's fingers and the excited gleam in his eyes. This was a man passionate about history, and potentially a goldmine of information. "Your grandfather's classes are a big part of why I'm here, actually," Ethan said, laying the groundwork for his next move. "I've been thinking a lot about Willowbrook's history lately, especially some of the stories he used to tell about the Civil War era. I was hoping you might be able to fill in some gaps for me." Tom's enthusiasm was palpable. "Oh, absolutely. What would you like to know?" As Tom launched into a detailed account of Willowbrook's past, Ethan listened carefully, his keen mind piecing together the puzzle. He asked pointed questions about local legends, historical sites, and prominent families, all under the guise of nostalgic curiosity. By the time he left the museum 2 hours later, Ethan's head was swimming with information. He had a much clearer picture of where the artifacts might be hidden, and more importantly, who might know their exact location. As he walked back to the inn, the setting sun casting long shadows across Main Street, Ethan felt a familiar thrill of anticipation. His web of deception was expanding, drawing in the unsuspecting residents of Willowbrook. Soon, he would have everything he needed to locate the hidden treasure. But as he caught sight of Olivia waving to him from the inn's porch, a strange feeling tugged at him. For a brief moment, he found himself wishing that Daniel Foster was real, that he truly was just a man returning home, reconnecting with his roots. Ethan pushed the thought aside ruthlessly. He couldn't afford such sentimentality. He had a job to do, and nothing, not the warm welcome of the townspeople, not the charming simplicity of Willowbrook life, could be allowed to derail his plans. As night fell over the village, Ethan retreated to his room, mind racing with plans for the days ahead. The game was on, and he intended to win, no matter the cost. A week into his stay in Willowbrook, Ethan had settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning he'd chat with Olivia over breakfast, gleaning tidbits of local gossip. His days were spent exploring the town, meeting with Mayor Carlson, and cultivating relationships with key residents. Evenings often found him in the company of Tom Granger, poring over historical documents in the museum's back room. On this particular morning, Ethan sat in a corner booth of the diner, nursing a cup of coffee as he waited for his breakfast. His mind wandered to the previous night's conversation with Tom. They discussed the Mason house at length, and Ethan was convinced it held the key to finding the artifacts. Mind if I join you? Ethan looked up to see an elderly woman standing by his table, leaning heavily on a cane. He recognized her as Margaret Holloway, one of the town's oldest residents. Please, Mrs. Holloway, Ethan said, standing to help her into the booth. It's a pleasure to see you again. Margaret settled herself with a grateful nod. You always were a polite boy, Daniel. Now tell me, what's all this I hear about you wanting to restore the old Mason place? Ethan leaned in, adopting an earnest expression. Well, I've been talking with Mayor Carlson about ways to boost tourism in Willowbrook. The Mason house seems like it could be a real draw if we fixed it up. I was hoping to learn more about its history. Margaret's eyes twinkled. Oh, that old place has quite a story. Did you know it was part of the Underground Railroad? Really? Ethan feigned surprise. That must have been dangerous. Oh, it was, Margaret nodded. The Masons were abolitionists, you see. There are all sorts of stories about secret rooms and hidden passages. My grandmother used to tell tales of treasures hidden away in case the house was ever searched. Ethan's heart raced, but he kept his voice casual. Treasures? Like what? Oh, who knows? Margaret waved a hand dismissively. Family heirlooms, important documents, maybe even gold. But it's probably just old stories. No one's found anything in all these years. As they continued to chat, Ethan's mind whirled with possibilities. The treasures Margaret mentioned could very well be the artifacts he was seeking. He needed to get into that house. After breakfast, Ethan made his way to the town hall for his meeting with Mayor Carlson. The mayor greeted him enthusiastically, ushering him into a cramped office lined with faded photographs of Willowbrook's past. Daniel, my boy, I can't tell you how excited we are about your interest in the Mason house, Carlson began, settling behind his desk. It's been an eyesore for years, but with your investment, we could turn it into a real tourist attraction. Ethan nodded, leaning forward. I'm excited too, Mr. Mayor, but before we go any further, I'd like to take a look inside the house, get a feel for what we're dealing with. The mayor's smile faltered slightly. Well, now, that might be a bit tricky. The place isn't exactly up to code. It could be dangerous. I understand the risks, Ethan pressed, but I can't commit to this project without seeing what I'm getting into. Surely we could arrange a quick tour. After some back and forth, the mayor finally agreed. All right, I suppose we could take a look tomorrow afternoon. I'll have to clear it with the town council, but I don't foresee any problems. As Ethan left the town hall, he allowed himself a small smile of triumph. He was one step closer to his goal. The rest of the day passed in a blur of careful networking and information gathering. Ethan made sure to be seen around town, reinforcing his image as the prodigal son returned to invest in his hometown. That evening, he found himself once again at the museum with Tom. As they pored over old maps of the Mason property, Ethan casually mentioned his upcoming tour of the house. Tom's eyes lit up. Really? Oh, I'd love to come along if that's all right. The Mason house is a historian's dream. Ethan hesitated for a moment. Having Tom along could complicate things, but it might also provide valuable cover for his true intentions. Sure, he said finally. I'd appreciate your expertise. As he walked back to the inn that night, Ethan felt a mix of excitement and unease. Tomorrow could be the day he finally located the artifacts. But as he caught sight of Olivia sweeping the inn's porch, a pang of guilt hit him unexpectedly. These people trusted him. They saw him as Daniel Foster, their long-lost neighbor, not as Ethan Cole, the con artist here to steal their heritage. For a moment, he considered abandoning the whole scheme. But then he thought of the fortune waiting to be claimed, of the life he could have once this job was done. He squared his shoulders and pushed the guilt aside. He had come too far to turn back now. As he climbed the stairs to his room, Ethan began mentally preparing for the next day's exploration. Whatever happened at the Mason house, he had to be ready. The biggest challenge of his career, and the biggest payoff, was just hours away. The next afternoon found Ethan standing before the dilapidated Mason house, its weathered facade looming against the overcast sky. Mayor Carlson fidgeted nervously beside him, while Tom Granger practically vibrated with excitement. Now remember, the mayor cautioned, fumbling with a ring of keys, we're just taking a quick look. The place isn't structurally sound, so we need to be careful. Ethan nodded absently, his eyes roaming over the building's exterior. Despite its state of disrepair, the house retained an air of faded grandeur. His trained eye picked out potential hiding spots, loose bricks, oddly placed windows, areas where the architecture didn't quite make sense. As they entered, the musty smell of decay assaulted their senses. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows. Tom immediately began pointing out historical features, his voice echoing in the empty rooms. Look at this fireplace, he enthused, running a hand along the ornate mantelpiece. It's original to the house, and see how deep it is? Perfect for hiding people or valuables. Ethan made a show of examining the fireplace, surreptitiously checking for hidden compartments. Finding nothing, he moved on, letting Tom's excited chatter provide cover for his methodical search. As they progressed through the house, Ethan's frustration grew. He'd found nothing, no secret passages, no hiding spots, nothing to indicate the presence of hidden artifacts. He was beginning to wonder if he'd made a mistake, if the legends were just that, legends. Then, in what had once been the master bedroom, something caught his eye. A floorboard, slightly out of alignment with its neighbors. To anyone else, it might have looked like simple decay, but to Ethan's experienced gaze, it screamed of deliberate concealment. He casually made his way over, pretending to examine a cracked mirror, while he tested the board with his foot. It gave slightly, confirming his suspicions. Hey, Tom, he called out, keeping his voice light. What do you make of this mirror? Looks pretty old. As Tom hurried over, launching into a description of 19th century glassmaking techniques, Ethan subtly shifted his position to stand directly on the loose board. He'd have to come back later, alone, to investigate properly. Their tour concluded without further discoveries, and Ethan found himself both relieved and anxious to return. As they exited the house, Mayor Carlson turned to him expectantly. Well, Daniel, what do you think? Is it worth the investment? Ethan put on his most charming smile. It's certainly a challenge, Mr. Mayor, but I think it has potential. I'd like to consult with some colleagues before making a final decision, if that's all right. The mayor seemed pleased, and they parted ways with promises to meet again soon. As Ethan walked back towards the inn, his mind raced with plans. He needed to get back into that house tonight. The rest of the day crawled by at an agonizing pace. Ethan forced himself to maintain his usual routines, chatting with locals, and even sitting down for a lengthy dinner with Olivia and some of the inn's other guests. All the while, his thoughts were fixed on the loose floorboard and what might lie beneath it. Finally, well past midnight, Ethan slipped out of the inn. The streets of Willowbrook were deserted, the only sound the distant barking of a dog. He made his way to the Mason house, keeping to the shadows. Picking the lock was child's play for someone of Ethan's skills. Within moments, he was inside, switching on a small flashlight. He moved swiftly to the master bedroom, his heart pounding with anticipation. The loose floorboard came up easily, revealing a small cavity beneath. Ethan's breath caught as his flashlight illuminated something metallic. Reaching in, he pulled out a small, ornate box. With trembling hands, he opened it. Inside lay a collection of papers, yellowed with age, and several small objects wrapped in cloth. Ethan carefully unfolded one of the papers, revealing a letter dated 1863. His eyes widened as he skimmed its contents. It was a detailed account of Underground Railroad activities, complete with names and dates. The wrapped objects turned out to be a mix of jewelry and small gold coins. Ethan's mind raced, calculating their potential value. This was it, the treasure he'd come for. As he carefully repacked the box, a floorboard creaked behind him. Ethan whirled around, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness to illuminate a shocked face. "Daniel, what are you doing here?" It was Olivia, her eyes wide with confusion and growing suspicion, as she took in the scene. Ethan crouched on the floor with the stolen box in his hands. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Ethan's mind raced through his options. He could try to explain, to lie his way out of this, or he could run, abandoning his carefully crafted persona but escaping with the prize. As he opened his mouth to speak, the weight of his deception suddenly felt overwhelming. In Olivia's eyes, he saw not just surprise, but hurt, the pain of betrayal. In that moment, Ethan Cole faced a choice that would define not just the outcome of his con, but the course of his life. The next few seconds would determine everything. His fate, the fate of the artifacts, and the trust of an entire town that had welcomed him as one of their own. The silence stretched between Ethan and Olivia, thick with tension. His mind raced, calculating odds and outcomes, but for once, his silver tongue failed him. "Olivia, he began, but she cut him off. "Don't," she said, her voice trembling. "Just don't lie to me anymore, Daniel. Or is that even your real name?" Ethan's shoulders sagged. In that moment, faced with Olivia's hurt and anger, the weight of his deception became unbearable. "No," he said quietly. "It's not. My name is Ethan Cole." Olivia's eyes widened, a mix of emotions playing across her face: shock, disappointment, and a flicker of something else. Curiosity, perhaps? "Why?" she asked simply. Ethan looked down at the box in his hands, then back at Olivia. For the first time in years, he felt the urge to tell the truth. The whole truth. "I'm a con artist," he admitted. "I came here looking for these artifacts. They're worth a fortune on the black market." Olivia's gasp echoed in the empty room. "So everything, your whole story about coming home, wanting to invest in the town, it was all a lie?" Ethan nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "Yes, all of it." "I can't believe this," Olivia said, shaking her head. "Do you have any idea what you've done? The whole town has been so excited about your return, about the possibility of revitalizing Willowbrook, and it was all just a scheme to steal our history." Her words hit Ethan like a physical blow. He'd run countless cons before, but never had he felt the impact of his deception so acutely. The faces of the townspeople flashed through his mind: Mr. Wilson's warm welcome, Tom's enthusiastic friendship, Mayor Carlson's hopeful plans for the future, and Olivia, kind, trusting Olivia, who had welcomed him like a long-lost friend. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling woefully inadequate. "I never meant to—" "To what?" Olivia interrupted, anger now overtaking her shock. "To get caught? To hurt people? What did you think was going to happen, Ethan?" The use of his real name jolted him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I didn't think about it. I just saw an opportunity and took it. It's what I've always done." Olivia studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "And now? What are you going to do now that I've caught you?" It was the question Ethan had been asking himself from the moment he'd heard her footsteps. He looked down at the box in his hands, feeling the weight of its contents, both literal and figurative. I I don't know," he said honestly. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole was at a loss. The smart play would be to run, to push past Olivia, escape with the artifacts, and never look back. It's what he would have done in the past without hesitation. But something held him back. Maybe it was the genuine connections he'd formed in Willowbrook, or the weight of the town's hopes he'd unwittingly taken on. Or maybe it was just Olivia's steady gaze, filled with disappointment, but not devoid of compassion. "You have a choice to make, Ethan," Olivia said softly. "You can take those artifacts and run, or you can do the right thing. It's up to you." Ethan looked at the box, then back at Olivia. In that moment, he saw two paths stretching out before him. One familiar, paved with lies and stolen riches. the other unknown and uncertain, but offering something he'd never truly had, a chance at redemption. His hands tightened on the box as he wrestled with the decision. Everything he'd ever known, every instinct honed over years of cons and schemes, told him to run. But a small voice, one he'd long ignored, whispered of another possibility. With a deep breath, Ethan made his choice. He held out the box to Olivia. "I've made a lot of mistakes in my life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know if I can ever make up for them, but I'd like to try, starting now." Olivia's eyes widened in surprise. Slowly, she reached out and took the box from him. "This this is a start," she said cautiously. "But what happens now? You've lied to everyone. You've broken the law." Ethan nodded, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "I know, and I'll face the consequences. But first, I think it's time the people of Willowbrook heard the truth, all of it. Will you help me?" Olivia studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of deception. Whatever she saw there must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly. "All right," she said. "But no more lies, Ethan. Not to me, not to anyone in this town. Understood?" "Understood," Ethan agreed, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders even as uncertainty about his future settled in. As they left the Mason house together, the box of artifacts safely in Olivia's possession, Ethan knew that the hardest part of his journey was just beginning. He had a town to face, a truth to tell, and a lifetime of wrongs to try to make right. But for the first time in as long as he could remember, Ethan Cole felt something he'd thought was lost to him forever: hope. The following morning dawned bright and clear, a stark contrast to the turmoil in Ethan's mind. He sat in the small conference room of the Willowbrook Town Hall, his hands clasped tightly on the table before him. Olivia sat beside him, her presence both comforting and nerve-wracking. Mayor Carlson entered, followed by Tom Granger and several members of the town council. Their expressions ranged from confused to concerned as they took their seats. "Daniel," the mayor began, "or should I say Mr. Cole, Olivia tells us you have something important to share with us." Ethan took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "Yes, Mr. Mayor, I owe all of you the truth and an apology." Over the next hour, Ethan laid bare his deception. He explained who he really was, why he had come to Willowbrook, and what he had discovered in the Mason house. He held nothing back, watching as shock, anger, and disbelief played across the faces of those gathered. When he finished, a heavy silence filled the room. It was Tom who broke it, his voice tight with betrayal. "I trusted you. We all did. How could you do this?" Ethan met his gaze squarely. "I've spent most of my life taking advantage of people's trust. It's not an excuse, but it's the truth. I didn't expect to care about this town or its people. But I do, and I'm truly sorry for the pain I've caused." Mayor Carlson leaned forward, his expression grave. "Mr. Cole, you do realize that what you've done is crime? We should be calling the police right now." "I know," Ethan nodded. "And I'm prepared to face the consequences of my actions. But before you do that, I'd like to make an offer." He outlined his proposal: to use his skills and connections to help authenticate and properly value the artifacts, to assist in securing grants for their preservation and for the restoration of the Mason house. He even offered to use his own funds, earned through less than legal means, he admitted, to kickstart the project. "I know it doesn't make up for what I've done," Ethan concluded, "but I want to try to make things right. This town deserves that much." The council members exchanged glances, a mix of skepticism and consideration on their faces. Mayor Carlson cleared his throat. "Mr. Cole, while your offer is unexpected, it doesn't change the fact that you've committed several crimes. We'll need time to discuss this and consult with the proper authorities." Ethan nodded, understanding the magnitude of what he was asking. As the meeting adjourned, he felt a strange mix of relief and apprehension. He had told the truth finally, but the road ahead was far from clear. Over the next few weeks, Ethan's fate hung in the balance. He remained in Willowbrook, under the watchful eyes of the townspeople, as legal consultations and heated debates took place. The artifacts he had discovered became the talk of the town, with experts from nearby universities called in to examine them. To his surprise, many of the townspeople, while hurt by his deception, seemed to appreciate his honesty and his desire to make amends. Olivia, in particular, became an unexpected ally, advocating for him to the town council. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, a decision was reached. In a town hall meeting, Mayor Carlson announced that, in light of Ethan's cooperation and the value of the artifacts he had helped uncover, they would not be pressing charges. Instead, Ethan would be required to assist in the restoration project and educational programs surrounding the artifacts, under strict supervision. As the meeting dispersed, Ethan found himself surrounded by a mix of curious and cautiously friendly faces. Tom approached him, his expression still guarded, but no longer hostile. "You know," Tom said, "my grandfather used to say that history is full of people who made mistakes and then tried to make them right. I guess you're part of Willowbrook's history now, for better or worse." Ethan managed a small smile. "I hope it'll be for the better in the end." As he left the town hall, Ethan felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned to find Olivia standing there, a tentative smile on her face. "So," she said, "ready to start your new life as an honest man?" Ethan chuckled, the sound tinged with both nervousness and hope. "I'm not sure I know how, to be honest, but I'm willing to learn." Olivia's smile widened. "Well, lucky for you, Willowbrook is a pretty good place to start over. Come on, I'll buy you a coffee, and we can start planning the restoration project." As they walked down Main Street together, Ethan marveled at the turn his life had taken. He had come to Willowbrook looking for a big score, but instead had found something far more valuable: a chance at redemption, a community willing to give him a second chance, and perhaps, just perhaps, a place he could finally call home. The road ahead would not be easy. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. But as Ethan looked around at the town he had come to care for, he knew that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was meant to be.